All right, let's get
Kind
going.
of like the podcast. Who's going to start?
Yeah. So today, of course, is Charlie. We had just mentioned that, and we'll let him kind of control that in a minute. He'll be talking about the dust spray misuse,
No, you got to say that word.
the hidden epidemic of
No,
dusting
no.
spray, difluoroethane, fluoroethane,
Fluoroethane. Anyway. I get to fangirl my favorite human. I think I'm just cannot believe 1 week from today, we will be sitting like he will be right here. I'll push Kurt aside and, Sam Quinones will be sitting right next to me. So yes, his paperback came out today. That's why we are not in Nashville today. And so, yeah, Sam Quinones next week. So please be sure to tell all of your friends. He is going to kind of highlight the timeline of what's gone on since the prescribing and as well as the heroin trade coming from Mexico and the things he's learned and seen and from the streets and all of the things. So
should be interesting.
Stay tuned. All right.
All right. Upcoming echoes again next week. Sam Quinones. The following Wednesday, we have Minnesota Department of Health coming on for an epidemiologic perspective of substance use and overdose. So
yeah, that is the suitors data, the most updated suitors data. We will hear it right off the press, probably before anybody else.
Yeah.
So that's exciting.
Just remember, we've taken a couple of times off, once right at Thanksgiving, and then over the holiday between New Year's and Christmas. And
then we have a very exciting first one of the new year coming. Stay tuned for that. If there's more than one person in your room, please chat us in. Please turn your videos on. Like y'all can see, this is Charlie's 24th Echo presentation for us. All the titles that he's done is behind us, and we are making him summarize them all in an upcoming visit with us. CME, you'll get the link at the end of this talk in the chat, otherwise in your email shortly after.
Remember, if you need some technical assistance, you can reach out to Erin. There's her cell. Our cells, most people already know them, but if you need something or help with a patient or questions, feel free to call.
I was not exactly know what to say on this page at this moment, but the online source, there's lots of resources. There's links to other resources. If you want to get into any of the other echoes, we keep promising you this manual. If anyone would like it, just please email one of us and we can kind of work on that. We're trying to figure out the best way to put this online and what that looks like for easy access. So if you need anything, want anything, let us know via email or text or cell phone or whatever, and we'll work on that for you.
Perfect. The Addiction Connection, actually one came out yesterday on perioperative care with patients on Suboxone. So feel free to check that out. It's going to be a 2-part series, I think, of different perioperative. 3-part different things surrounding having surgery and being on Suboxone.
All right, so I'm going to end this. I'm sure Charlie's going to share his own slides. So with that, yes, Charlie's 24th Echo presentation. Of course, everyone's favorite Echo presenter. That's why this one, actually, I am going to full disclosure this. Charlie brought this topic to us, rather than us hounding him for a last minute.
Yeah. As mentioned, Charlie did say in some of the YouTube videos, there are some words, profane words.
But he said PG-13.
PG-13.
No, maybe a little further. Okay.
I think you could probably skate by with a PG-13 on this one, but it's flirting with rated R.
Okay.
But I think PG-13, we can rate it later.
But they are in context of what we're learning about. So we're going to leave those in.
It's funny to think 24 talks because I feel like I feel totally energetic to participate and happy to participate. And I don't want to go to the well too often or overstay my welcome, but I'm loving it. And I love the work you guys do. So let's see. I'm going to share sound and optimize for video clip. And I'm going to go to this. We're going to go up here. And we are going to, can you all see that?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, I pronounce it difluoroethane. I don't know how to actually pronounce it, but DFE is basically what everybody calls it. And I do think this is truly what you would call a hidden epidemic, and I'll explain why I think that. And I also, even though it is currently fairly epidemic, I think it could grow if nothing happens. And so I'll make a case that this is a problem we're not seeing, and this is also a problem that could grow. I'm not really going to talk about off-label use, but there's a chance I talk about some off-label use, just speculating what might help DFE addiction. And actually, part of the reason that I'm doing this is for the first time, literally in my life, I am a paid expert witness, and I am not just trying to get money, but I deeply believe in this cause. And this is litigation, the style of litigation like the tobacco companies or the opioid pharmaceutical or distributor companies. It's the same style of litigation. Obviously, it's not as big of a thing as the opioid epidemic or tobacco, but it is like, so we can talk about what it's like to be an expert witness. I'm not going to reveal any of the details of the specific litigation. Everything I would tell you is open to the public, available to the public information. And I'm going to talk about specific cases, and those aren't even necessarily involved in the litigation I'm involved in. So you could talk. I'm happy to also take questions about what it's like to be an expert witness and what that's all about. But this is one where I normally wouldn't do this, but I actually, when I heard about the case, I was like, yeah, I want to do this. And it's been pretty amazing. So I'm going to start with a few instances. These were cut and paste from newspaper articles or from online newspapers. So here's one. In December 2017, Natalie Cherez, I don't know how to pronounce the name, was driving with her adult daughter, Samantha. She was up in northern Minnesota, up by, I think, Lake of the Woods. And then a man named Tyler Harmon lost control of his vehicle, crossed the median, and struck their vehicle head on. It was later determined that Harmon had intentionally inhaled Ultra Duster, that's the name brand, to get high, and he was driving impaired. And then there was critical injuries. They were airlifted to a nearby hospital, but luckily they both lived. So that's a case in Minnesota. And you may have heard about this. This was in 2018. There's some individual named True, whatever. This is right out of the newspaper. And another passenger. They bought cans of air dusting spray from a Walmart 2 miles from the scene of the crash. Then they got in their car and drove. They had been huffing the aerosol can before driving down a rural Wisconsin highway. And unfortunately, there was a group of 12 Girl Scouts, 5 adults, and 7 children. The Girl Scouts were picking up trash in the ditch of the highway as a community service project. And then this individual, True, in his black Ford F-150, drifted towards the group. The passenger grabbed the wheel to try to steer it correctly, but then the driver grabbed the wheel back and turned it sharply, sending the truck directly into the volunteers. And it doesn't say that, it says fatal incident. 4 girls were killed by this guy who was huffing dusting spray and driving at the same time. So that was 2018 in Wisconsin. 4 Girl Scouts were killed by this intoxicated driving. I'm going to show you this. I'm going to show you this video, and then we're going to talk more about driving. But this video gets to a little bit of driving. So this guy's in a parking lot where a lot of this nonsense happens. So watch this video. This is some other person just saw this happening and videotaped it.
Oh shit, he went back in his truck.
Uh-oh.
Oh my god.
Oh my fucking god.
Oh, what is wrong with that guy? Oh my god. What the fuck?
Okay, so just he huffed dusting spray. He did it through his t-shirt. I'll explain that in a minute. And now he's experiencing so he's in the driver's seat of a car in a parking lot. So just think about how crazy that is. And now I'm just going to play it a little longer, and we'll go from there. Again, sorry about the swear words. As you can see, it's not the most professional director who is managing the cinematography. It's just some guys recording it.
Oh my God.
Are you serious, dude?
And it keeps going from there, and you can sort of watch it later. I mean, it's the same kind of stuff. Let me see if, he continues to huff again, and on and on and on. So there is,
Oh my.
okay. And I'll also share this as separate. This is way back in 1997. 1997 is when DFE basically entered the market. Right away, there's a case report of 2 traffic fatalities related to DFE use. Okay. Again, young Caucasian males. Often they're in rural areas. They huff DFE, they lose control of their car, and then they get into an accident resulting in deaths. So there is a specific issue with driving on this stuff. There's a bigger issue that I'm going to talk about, but I just wanted to key you in as a starting point on something's happening where people are driving on this inhalant and causing fatalities. Okay, so that's the intro. So what am I going to talk about? So what are these dusting sprays, and why is this drug DFE in the dusting spray? Okay, what does it do to the brain and the body? What do we know about how many people and who are misusing dusting sprays? How widespread is this? What are the patterns of DFE misuse, and what are the harms from DFE, and what can be done about it, if anything? Many of you may even have this stuff in your office or in your home. Dusting spray is a commercially available, it's intended to be a household cleaning product. It's this can with this like trigger on the can, and if you pull the trigger, it shoots out a jet of compressed air. It is not actually air. Air implies that it's not, that it's like the air we breathe. It is not air. It is compressed volatile gas. Okay. And so these are 2 examples. There are many, many examples on the market. And I just want to point out this 12-pack of 10-ounce dusting spray cans is $60. So this 12-pack is $5 a can. So 1 can would be $5. So it's also called sometimes keyboard dusting spray because the kind of ideal use, and I'm looking at my keyboard now, and my keyboard now is just full of like crumbs and dust and stains. My keyboard is like the grossest thing ever. Okay. But how do you clean between the keys of your keyboard? And dusting spray is a way to get into those small spaces. Another thing is like if you had like something that had like a screw top to screw onto a jar or something like that, and you had threads of a screw, and you need to clean between the threads of the screw, like a tiny space. These dusting spray, they create little air jet. Again, not air jet, it's a jet of gas that can blast between the threads of a screw or other electronic things where you don't want to touch it with your hand, but you want to clean off the surface. And this cleans the surface of things without having to rub it down with your hand. So it's this household product used to clean delicate or small spaces. Let's see, it releases compressed gas. It has a trigger. Back in the 80s and 90s, dusting spray the compressed gas was CFC. And the problem with CFC, if you remember, is that it destroyed the ozone layer. So for old people, people my age and older, we remember the ozone layer was everybody was worried about ozone layer. And that was relating to the CFCs in, hairspray and other things. But in about the year 2000, as early as 1997, as we just saw, because of, climate concerns, environmental concerns, the compressed gas was switched to DFE. And DFE is much more environmentally safe. So DFE became the compressed gas in these keyboard dusting sprays in about the year 2000. So what, you know, if you wanted to get a can of dusting spray, where would you find it? Any hardware store, any computer store, Walmart, Target, all of those sort of whatever they're called, department retail stores, or, you know, all of those stores. There's lots of brick and mortar stores that have it. You can also order it online. Basically, every American is a short drive away from purchasing dusting spray. It's basically everyone in America. It's as close as the nearest hardware store or Target or Walmart. And to make matters worse, dusting spray cans, you know, what these kids were inhaling, what this kid was inhaling, are usually found among the household products with no supervision or monitoring. Sometimes they're found in electronic aisles. Sometimes they've been put in the back to school section. They're literally putting these cans of this intoxicating gas in a back to school section. Or even in like a video game section, because they figure that kids use keyboards and that the kids want to, you know, buy one of these to keep their keyboard clean or whatever. So it's literally marketed to adolescents sometimes. There are some places, like as a little bit of field research, I went into a Target and I asked for dusting spray, and they said, actually, we keep all the cans of dusting spray in the back and we need to see an ID. So I was pretty impressed with that. That was a good thing that Target did. But a lot of these places like Home Depot and Walmart and all these places, Office Max, all these places, the dusting spray is just on the shelves with all the rest of the cleaning supplies. So you can buy a can of dusting spray for $6, and they are sold in 10-ounce cans, but they're also sold in like supersize cans. And you can get, if in certain places, you can get the price down to $3 a can. If you buy in bulk. There is no reason for a household member to buy dusting spray cans in bulk, because unless you have like a workshop, electronics workshop, you're not going to go through a can of dusting spray that fast. Really, like, you know, my partner has dusting spray cans, and it's still around. It's been 6 months. It's been long. It's almost a year. It's still around and mostly full. There are uses, but it's not like you need to use it all the time. That said, there are 20 million cans of dusting spray sold per year. And so there's some things to remember here. $3 a can, you can get down as low as $3 a can, and there are 20 million cans per year. And I don't know about you, but if dusting spray can last a year, do we really need to sell 20 million cans? Who's really buying all these cans of dusting spray? So, okay, what is DFE? These dusting spray cans are often 100% pure DFE. Like, that's the only ingredient. Sometimes they're 99.5% pure because they add, you know, maybe one other minor ingredient. We can talk about that if you want. But they're basically 100% pure DFE. It just so happens that DFE is a chemical that you can put it in a can and it will be liquid form, but then it very quickly volatilizes to gas and becomes a pressurized gas. So DFE is like chemically a really ideal chemical for this. The problem is it's like addictive, but so these cans, so for $3, you can get a 100% pure can of DFE. DFE is a halogenated hydrocarbon. DFE is an anesthetic. In fact, it like literally is an anesthetic. And the only reason it is not used in the operating room, it's related to other anesthetics. The only reason it's not used in the operating room is because it's explosive. And they don't want to have like flammable gases in the operating room, clearly. But it is literally, physically in the human body, it behaves as a sedative anesthetic. And so the closest thing you could think about is like DFE is basically laughing gas in a can. So you can go right now, you can go to Walmart and buy a can of essentially laughing gas for $5. Okay, here we go. Brace yourself. This is going to be a little intense. So there's a bunch of videos here. Get that out. let's see.
All right. I'm gonna do something, nothing or most common.
Oh, shoot. Hold on.
And so.
Here we go. This guy, let me back up a second.
So, just.
All we are seeing, Charlie, just so you know, is your PowerPoint like
Oh,
application.
okay. We got a problem. Let me see if I can fix that. I'm going to unshare and reshare, and maybe that'll help. Hold on. All right. Let's see. Share screen. And I think YouTube is going to be what I want to share. Is that better? Can you see that now?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So this is a guy, literally a YouTube video, someone teaching other people how to huff dusting spray.
Dusting cans. You want to put a shirt over the can just like that before you inhale it so that you don't freeze your lungs.
We'll get to that later. You might not have heard that. It's because it's compressed air, compressed gas. When it becomes gas, it's very cold. And so you will potentially have a frostbite if you inhale it. So that's why people use a t-shirt and they blast the jet of gas through the t-shirt.
Just like this to your mouth. And it's supposed to give you a very euphoric feeling, and I love doing it from time to time. Your voice too. Forgot to tell you about that. And you get a very quick rush to your head, and you just kind of want to lay down and
There's that rated PG-13. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. So I'll just do, you can see this video, is that right?
Yep.
Okay, here we go.
See what I'm doing? Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna pee myself. What's today? Ashlyn. What? What? Wait, what? Wow. Shit.
Okay, so wait, I want to just pause on one thing. She went from like on the ground, saying what's today and I want to pee myself. And 15 seconds later, she's sitting up and she's more alert. And that is a really important thing to notice. This gets you really intoxicated, but people like bounce out of it really quick and want to get intoxicated again really quick.
I peed. It's 3 o'clock. I really thought that I was laying in my room.
Okay, we're gonna do a couple more. This is a quick one. It's again with the theme of what are these guys doing in the car? What are they doing in the car? Okay.
Say something.
I ain't got nothing to say.
He's just kind of spaced out. This person at some point is going to start the car and drive it. It's crazy. So, okay, that was a quick one. Here's another car video just to let you know how bad this is a problem. Just one or two more, and then we'll get back to the talk.
What happened? You hit a few cars, huh? Are you okay? Mm. What's wrong?
Nothing.
Did you hit a few cars?
She's just got this
Did you hit a few cars?
blank look in her eyes.
You sure? Your car looks pretty banged up. Do you need an ambulance?
It's just like totally heartbreaking. And then this is the last one. I think that on this, there's two things to look for. One is listen to how long this person inhales DFE. And then two is listen to or look and see how long she's intoxicated for. So this is like a very sustained, she's really taking a big hit of DFE. So I'll do this. And then there's the last one, then I get back to the talk.
Get your ass out of the street. Crazy. And she's gonna do it again. You inhaling that?
She's having a hard time even holding on to the bottle.
Okay, hit that. Kevin, watch out. Okay, hit that.
Okay, all right. Oof. It's always hard. It's hard for me to watch that. Before I go back to the talk, I'm just going to quickly see if there's any questions.
Yeah, Charlie, it was kind of interesting that the last two didn't, or a couple of those didn't use the T-shirt. They just
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I didn't get the message to turn up the volume. Hopefully, you didn't really need to hear that much of it. Hopefully, the visual was enough if the audio wasn't great. Yeah, so a lot of people do not use the T-shirt, and I'll show you some of the consequences of not using protection when you inhale. I'll show you some, and then I will talk about overdoses. There's a lot of words for this, okay? There's huffing. So there's, and I can't, honestly, I'm terrible with these words. Some people soak a rag with it and then put the rag over their face. And sometimes when they inhale through clothing, even if they run out, they then keep smelling the clothing because there's some residual in the clothing. And actually clothing that smells like chemicals is a clue for parents that that's a concern. So that's one way of doing it. Bagging is fill a bag with this gas and then inhale from the bag. That is dangerous because people will sometimes asphyxiate on the bag. They'll literally put it over their head and then they'll get intoxicated and they'll asphyxiate. And then you can inhale through your nose or you can inhale through your mouth. So, and then they all have different names. There's huffing, inhaling, bagging. So yeah. I think huffing has to relate to through clothes or with clothes. And then we'll talk about overdosing. And then we'll talk about the target and the retailers. It's a great question. I want to get into a brainstorm on how to fix this at the end. That's a great question. Okay, so let's get back to the talk. Okay. And let's see from current slide. Okay, so inhaled DFE. So inhaled DFE is a GABA agonist and has some NMDA antagonism. It's basically like if you could take a large amount of alcohol and inhale it suddenly, or a benzo and inhale it suddenly. And I think if you are experienced, you know those videos do look like someone who suddenly ingested a large volume of benzos or alcohol or something. It's a sedative, so that people get euphoric, people can get giddy or disinhibited. Initially, people can be excitable, and then that can include rage in some situations, but very quickly they become relaxed. And then impairment can include amnesia. They are blacking out. Analgesia, this is an anesthetic. They're very ataxic. They're clumsy. You saw that in the video. They can also sometimes have slurred speech, sedation, and ultimately coma. Most people don't die from a DFE overdose like an opioid overdose, but we'll talk more on that later. Onset is within 10 seconds, and duration is usually just a couple minutes. So it is very quick onset and very, very quick on and very quick off. So these are like 5-minute intense intoxications. So you inhale it, very quickly you're intoxicated, and 5 minutes later, it's out of your system. However, if you keep using again and again and again repeatedly, then that can have a sustained effect that can last up to an hour. But still, you're only talking about effects that last up to an hour. So this is not like, this doesn't get you intoxicated all day. It gets you intoxicated on a very brief duration. It's absorbed through the lungs.
Charlie, can I ask a question
Yeah.
about the timing? Just because I wrote that. So when we're talking like the car accidents and all of that, this isn't something that, like I'm in my house, you'd use it, and then like an hour later, hey, let's go drive to a different party, that's going to cause the crash necessarily, or how long does it remain in like a testable situation? Like you mentioned, the guy that hit the Girl Scout, obviously he was doing it while he was driving and they could identify some substance in his blood, but
yeah. The toxicology is a really important question, number one. Number two, it's a super good point. If you were like using DFE for like a while straight, like a day, or many, many inhalations over and over and over again, then I think you really would be impaired an hour later. But if you use it only once, in a lot of these car accidents, they are using it while they drive. They're using it at the stoplight, or they're using it and it takes 10 seconds to kick in. In that time, they start the engine and they start driving. And so, yeah, I mean, the intoxication is, 90% of the time, the intoxication is quick and brief enough so that the car accidents are caused by literally using it immediately before driving. And there's a whole, and so I don't know if I answered your question.
No, and the reason I ask is just because, how do you prove it then that was kind of what led to that accident? Obviously, if it's in the car, the bottle, but if you're somebody in the car that's gonna, protect you or whatever, you know what I mean? Is that would be more the
I'm going to get to that. That's a great question. I'm not the forensic expert in any of these expert witness things. So it's not really my job to testify to that. But I'll just be telling you what I've gathered from the literature, because this is really well described in the literature and how they determined that they were related, but we'll answer that question. Thank you. So 70% of the inhaled DFE, 70% of the absorbed DFE goes to the brain. So most of the absorbed DFE goes directly to the brain. It can deposit in fatty tissues, such as the brain, so it can build up over time. And then it is excreted by the lungs. It is literally inhaled, and then it is exhaled, unchanged. Like if you inhale it and you wait 5 seconds and you exhale, your exhalation breath contains this drug. It's one of these weird instances where you are literally excreting the drug by breathing out. Only a tiny, tiny fraction of absorbed DFE is metabolized by the liver and excreted by the kidney. Basically, DFE is inhaled, goes to the brain, goes back to the blood, is exhaled unchanged, which is an amazing, very unusual for drugs of abuse. We don't think about it that often. And it is essentially, it is very hard to detect on standard toxicology. You can detect it with advanced toxicology. You're not going to be able to pick this up on your immunoassay. You're probably not going to pick it up outside of like a forensic level lab or a send out lab, and even that's challenging. This is a little blurry, but these are 2 doses of inhaled DFE. And this is in the exhalation of your breath. And this is also the blood level. So high dose DFE, and they're like administering it to a person. And then at this time point, they stop administering it to someone. Okay. So at 120 minutes, they get exposed to DFE for 120 minutes. And then they stop the DFE exposure and they measure how the exhalation DFE levels and the blood levels fall off. And you can see that basically As soon as you stop ingesting DFE, the blood levels fall off. And they did this on multiple different patients. So if you think about it with an addiction, clinician mindset, this is a drug that has an immediate effect and a brief duration, right? And immediate. So in order to use DFE, you basically have to keep doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it. And it's just like, it doesn't last. So you have to go back and do it again, and then again, and then again. And that repeated, multiple repeated euphoric episodes, that really drives both compulsive and impulsive use. And there's sort of a relationship there. I'm not an expert on this, but if you think about like tobacco users, someone who smokes a pack of cigarettes a day, maybe 200 times per day, maybe 400 times per day, they take a little puff of a cigarette. And each puff gives them a little kick. And it's like each time they puff, they reinforce a set of patterns and behaviors. So what am I doing when I take my puff of cigarette? And then it creates salience for all the triggers in my world. So all this like multiple instances of repeated dosing, each instance is a little reward, reinforces a certain pattern of addictive use. And that is very much the case for DFE use. They go on these binges. And so what is described with DFE users is almost always binges that go from hours to at most a day. Binges do not usually last longer than a day. Occasionally you hear about people that binge for 2 to 3 days, and then people kind of like walk away for it a little bit and come back later. So they're like serious alcohol binges or serious benzo binges where people black out and they have injuries and there's impulsive behavior. But it's more severe because it's inhaled rather than, ingested orally. And also they can be pretty brief. So, you can have a 3-hour, 4-hour binge where you just use all of a can or even 2 cans. Interestingly, people don't get tolerance. I mean, people do get tolerance, right? They can take a little more over time, but there is not a described withdrawal. So you can use over and over and over again, and you can get some tolerance to that, but there's not a withdrawal phenomenon. So I already kind of talked this through. So, okay, that's repetitive. Okay, so there is official designation of an addiction to DFE, but the way the DSM-5 works is that there is something called inhalant use disorder, but recognizing that there's lots of different types of inhalants and they're not all the same. What I'm showing you is clearly different than sniffing a Sharpie marker, right? Sniffing a Sharpie marker might get you a little intoxicated, but you're not like blasting 100% pure anesthetic into your lungs. So this is a different kind of inhalant. The DSM recognizes that. So for inhalant use disorder, they tell you to specify which inhalant, knowing that they're all somewhat different. So, but other than that, it's the normal substance use disorder criteria apply. So you would say the person has, moderate DFE use disorder or severe DFE use disorder. And then also to remember that this happens as a binge. So they're usually not using every single day of the week. Usually they're using for a day in which all hell breaks loose. And then they stop using and they have, maybe a week where they're not using. Heavy users can use 1 can a day, often 1 can a day. There's a lot of case reports on this, sometimes as much as 3 cans a day. But 1 can a day is like $5. That's like more than I spend on coffee. And it's less than I spend on coffee. I spend more money on coffee than that. For $5, you can have enough anesthetic to basically be intoxicated all day long. Some interesting patterns, some epidemiology. So this is the National Survey for drug use. I don't know. You're going to have to look at those letters. I can't remember those letters now. You can tell I'm going to be a really good expert witness. Yeah, whatever those letters mean. They have only a few years ago asked about DFE specifically. So now this national survey is now specifically asking about DFE, and 3 million people a year say, I have used DFE in the last year. So that is not insubstantial. That's 1% of our population, 3 million people out there. And remember, 20 million cans are sold. So 20 million cans are sold, and 3 million people say that they've misused it in the last year. That is not a favorable, that's a pretty bad ratio. And to the point of, does Target or Walmart or whoever know? I mean, I think that they do know, but they have not opened their books and they have not showed us who they think is buying these for what. But if they sell 20 million cans and 3 million people are misusing it, you can do a substantial amount of their sales is going to misuse. So of those who misuse it, 60% of people who have used DFE in the last year use it only for a couple days, like 11 days or less. So they may be just trying it. Maybe they go on a binge and they didn't like it. So most DFE users use infrequently. And then 22% use 50 days or more per year. So of the people using it, really, there aren't that many people that are using it every day. And even those who use it a lot don't use it every day. They use it intermittently. Active DFE use, which is probably DFE use disorder. This is probably an estimate for DFE use disorder, which is 0.2%. The cost to society, which is, it's in one of the references at the end, is estimated at $140 million in damages. This is total cost, and this is since DFE came on the market, not an annual cost. $140 million in damages, harms, and lost productivity from DFE misuse. And because there have been a number of deaths, and I'll show you the statistics on this, this is a federal agency estimated almost $700 million in cost of life, however you can quantify the value of a life, but the deaths cause a lot of cost to society. And so there's a substantial, almost $1 billion, almost $1 billion cost to society from DFE use. Inhalants in general are the first drugs kids use before tobacco. And that's crazy to think about that. The first drugs kids use are inhalants. And if you use inhalant, you're more likely to go on to other drugs. And these are kids that are going to Walmart and can literally just buy a can sometimes. It depends. There are age limits in some cases. But, and then 10 to 20% of high schoolers have used an inhalant during high school. That varies depending on the graduating class. It varies over time. So it was more prevalent previously. It's down to about 10% now, I think. But it waxes and wanes, depends on the year. And of the inhalants, DFE is among the most common. So dusting spray, the other thing to consider is dusting spray began about 20 years ago, which means all the high school kids 20 years ago are now in their 30s. And there's a lot of 30-year-olds that are still using DFE off and on. So there's this sort of generational effect. There aren't a ton of 70-year-olds using DFE, but there's a lot of 30-year-olds who started it in high school and still occasionally use it. And so that's a really important thing to consider. 70% of DFE users are male, and 90+% are under 54 years old. The crappy slides. Sorry about the slides. Here, it's a little blurry, but this is age. The left graph is age, and the white bar, which is getting larger as the kids get older, is dusting spray, is propellants, which is basically dusting spray. And so through high school, the last bar is 18-year-olds, basically. Through high school, people start by sniffing gasoline or sniffing a felt tip marker or whatever when they're like 9 or 10 years old. They're doing these sort of passive ingestions. And by the end of high school, the commonest form of ingesting an inhalant is a propellant, which is a DFE, is the most common propellant, and it gets blasted into your mouth, right? And then on the right is over time, years, the different types of inhalants, and the chart that's climbing, again, that's propellants. That's DFE. And DFE is in other types of propellants like bug spray has DFE in it. Hairspray has DFE in it. But the thing with hairspray and bug spray is it's not 100% pure DFE. It's like 30% DFE, enough to get a little spray action, but then 70% like whatever anti-bug chemical keeps the bugs away. So the bug spray is not a desirable product to misuse, and hairspray is not desirable. The most desirable propellant is dusting spray because it's pure. So the addictive risk. So, oh yeah, I forgot to include a slide on this, but there's a great range of, there's a great slide I can show you. I can send it to you later if you want to see it, estimating the addictive risk of all the different drugs. And in that graphic, I was going to show you inhalants in general had an addictive risk of about less than 5%, 4 or 5%. After you try an inhalant, what is the likelihood you'll get addicted? Whereas like tobacco is like 30% or 35% is tobacco. Tobacco and methamphetamines and smoked cocaine are at the top of you tried it once, will you get addicted? Famously, marijuana is 9% for adults and 18% for adolescents, right? So inhalants were less than 5%. If you try an inhalant, what's the chance you'll eventually get addicted to it? However, DFE is, first of all, high dose, high purity, and it's a propellant, so you can blast it into your lungs. So there have been a wide range of estimates in terms of the addictiveness of DFE inhalation. My guess is it's higher than 5%, but I think it's crazy to say 50%. But there are reputable people who are estimating DFE use disorder occurs 50% of the time after it's initiated. I give it more like a 10%, but we're all just guessing on this, right? So emergency and poison center. So this is the third commonest call caused by inhalants. So there's a decent amount of call. The fatality rate for poison centers call is 5.5%, which is pretty high. And this is the commonest cause of fatality among inhalants. There's 25,000 emergency department visits, and this known injuries and deaths since DFE came on the market is 1,000 deaths and 4,000 injuries. But that's an underestimate. So what does DFE do to harm you? Obviously, injuries and accidents are number one. But you can also get frostbite and angioedema. I'm going to show you some pictures of that. It sensitizes your heart tissue to catecholamines. It's like a weird thing that this DFE does, that if you ingest DFE, your heart tissue becomes sensitive to adrenaline. So if you then suddenly scare someone who's just inhaled DFE, they could have a sudden cardiac arrest and die on the spot. And this is a known thing. It's kind of a weird thing, but it's literally so established that they warn people. If you come across someone, they warn law enforcement. If you come across someone who's inhaling dusting spray, don't scare them and don't chase them because they could literally die on the spot. It's crazy. So that's a common cause of the deaths. That's one of the common causes of death. And heavy DFE use can cause kidney, liver, neuropathy, other issues. Here are some examples of frostbite on the right and angioedema, which isn't frostbite, but it's sort of almost like an allergic reaction on the left. So people get this from dusting spray. Tox testing. DFE is not detectable in the urine. It is only detectable in living humans in the blood. Although I suppose there could be a breathalyzer. That's not done, but it is in the exhaled air for at least minutes. So there could be a roadside breathalyzer. That would be interesting. But in living humans, it's blood. On autopsy, they can use organ tissue. So to Heather's question, on autopsy, if the person dies, they can compare central blood to peripheral blood to organ tissues, and they've worked all that out now, like what types of ratios and levels of DFE in all the different organs and blood areas, blood compartments or whatever. So they've worked out the ability to determine if the person was impaired on DFE based on autopsy. But on blood, if you want to get a blood sample for DFE, good luck. I mean, first of all, you need to obtain a blood sample within an hour of ingestion. You might get lucky if you get, if it's past an hour, but you probably need a blood sample within an hour. It needs to be sealed and stored properly because it's a volatile gas and it will all evaporate. So all the drug will evaporate right out of the blood sample if it's not sealed properly. Then you need to tell the tox lab that you're looking for DFE because they need to recalibrate their GCMS. The normal mass spectrometer, gas chromatography mass spec, cannot detect it, is not calibrated for it. So they literally need to set up their equipment for DFE. And then all that said, you still might miss it. So it's like very hard to get it on toxicology. So how do we know people are using? There's no validated screening tools. So nobody's like, so doctors and nurse practitioners, they don't ask patients about this because we don't even know how to ask patients about this. We haven't learned about it in medical school. 3 million people are using it. We haven't learned about it. And we basically lump DFE in with other inhalants, which I've told you isn't like super helpful. There's no treatments for DFE, and we're basically just letting it happen. So I think we as the medical field aren't identifying it and documenting it. How do we even know this is happening? Basically, it entirely depends on the first responders. People call 911, there's a car accident, and a paramedic or a police officer arrives. And if they see a dusting can spray, they can activate the steps required to do the tox testing and determine that this is a car accident related to dusting spray. If they don't see the dusting spray, how would they ever know? It's just like an impaired person with a car accident. And then by the time you get the breathalyzer, the dusting spray is all burned off and you can't test them anymore for DFE. So everything depends on the first responder seeing that can of dusting spray in the car or the accident or the home where they go. If someone had an overdose or has a cardiac arrest, you go to their home and if you don't see the dusting spray and if you don't know, you will never account for this as a dusting spray related injury. So I think we're missing a ton because everything falls on the first responder to catch it. The other thing with DFE and dusting spray is the rates of suicidality are very high. So 67% of people who use inhalants have suicidal thoughts and 20% of people who use inhalants attempt suicide. So it's super high risk inhalants, and DFE has just repeatedly been described as some of the deaths are suicide under the influence of DFE. And also there's a really highly comorbid depression and other mental illness. And so suicide, so it's a little less data driven for DFE specifically, but in general. So I'm going to kind of end with this. Let's back to why are people driving on it? I'm going to get to that. I'm going to take us off the slides and we can talk about it and then answer questions. But first I'm going to just do 2 more slides. Treatment of DFE use disorder. I mean, if it were me, I might try some of our alcohol use disorder treatments because it's also the same system. I might try naltrexone. I might try gabapentin. I might try topiramate. But I have no idea. Treating the underlying comorbid mental illness is clearly probably the priority. And what are we going to do about it? I mean, I think just remove it from the market. Or put in like a whole suite of safeties that to kind of limit purchases. But we'll talk about that in a second. I'm curious if anyone has any theories about why so many car accidents, and there have been many, many instances of car accidents, including fatalities, linked to dusting spray. So why is there this association with cars and dusting spray? Does anybody want to share a theory? I have a theory, but does anybody else want to share a theory?
Here's my shot at it. You go and get it and you're so excited to have it that you're at the Walmart parking lot. So you just crack it open because it doesn't last very long.
Yeah.
And
that's exactly what I think. What I think is like, who goes and buys a pack of cigarettes and doesn't doesn't open it up and smoke the first cigarette in the car.
Right.
It's just like, that's how people work. It's a very entrenched pattern. That's the impulsivity, compulsivity. I think people decide, they start thinking, I want to use, and they might even intend, they might have had an accident before. They might know it's a bad idea to use when I drive, and they go to the store. It's like me with a bag of candy. They go to the store and they buy it, and they get in the car, and they might even promise themselves, this is dumb, I can just wait until I get home. And they get to the first stoplight and they're like, F it, I want to huff. They just can't wait. And so that's my theory is.
Sorry.
Well, I was just,
Right.
Go ahead.
So we hear it like with other drugs too. You know, people drive to go pick up their meth, their fentanyl, their whatever. And, you know, that whole one is that anticipatory act of picking it up. And a lot of them will use immediately. Like this last week, you know, I pull into the parking lot and I use, and then I can drive home. And I don't know.
True confession, Charlie. I don't think I've ever had a Kit Kat bar that wasn't open right after they scanned it, and I had handed them the money.
Totally. Totally. But well, later you'll have to tell us if you eat the left bar first or the right bar first, but that's a separate story. I mean, and the other thing about DFE, I just say to bolster your argument, Kurt, and my theory, the fact pattern of these accidents is it always happens driving from the store where they purchased it. They're not out for a Sunday drive, right? They're not out in their car driving around. These accidents happen after they just obtained it. And that's the sort of the fact pattern of these accidents. So it bolsters the argument that they anticipatory, they go get it, they get in the car and they can't wait. And then they're stuck in the parking lot in the car, intoxicated. And at some point, and their judgment is impaired. And then at some point they just say, I'll just see if I can drive home. Well, questions or other thoughts? Go ahead.
If you're a young person, especially, you know, if we're talking middle school, high school, maybe not middle school as much, but that's easier to hide it a little bit. You know, like I'm not going to go home and use it at home where my parents might be, or they might hear me, or they might question what I'm doing in my bedroom. Like I'm going to sit in the car with my friends, and it's easier to not get caught in essence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You think, Charlie, that recognition is a huge, I mean, we were just talking, Heather and I, about how on our form we list all the different drugs that people may have used, and we want to know when they used it and when last, and we have inhalants on there, but I got to be honest, I've never really had a conversation about inhalants.
Yeah,
I mean,
me neither. And it is out there. I guarantee it.
I had one last week that had answered it, and it was, you know, the whole, I used it for a while when I was a kid. And I said, for a while, oh yeah, a couple of times. And that was it. And then like we started the other drugs, and now we're 50. And so it was like not a thing, which leads to this next question is long-term significance. Like what happens long-term? Do we even know, especially like that age group? Or is there a specified longevity of use where now you got to worry about long-term cognitive, whether it's dementia, it's other things. And part of me would think, gosh, does this kind of do what marijuana does and make, you know, the susceptibility to developing that schizophrenia come out more? I mean, I don't know.
So definitely, if you're a believer in the gateway theory, whatever you want to say about that, people who use inhalants go on to use other drugs and go on to have worse mental health outcomes. So, and that's an association. You can argue whether that's cause and effect or not. So that is definitely a worry about adolescents who use inhalants. Chronic intermittent low dose use is actually weirdly not super toxic, but chronic use can cause skeletal issues, can cause cerebellar damage. So that's more cerebellar damage than other types of the brain. You know, aside from, I bet you're right, Heather, that there's chronic mood effects. It may not be schizophrenia, but some type of effect on anxiety, suicidal thinking. I bet those things are affected by it. Not super well known. The skeletal fluorosis, the cerebellar disease, those are more well described. I do have to point out, Caitlin, I don't know if she's still on, had a really powerful comment that she has a relative who used this.
I'm
Yeah.
here.
Do you want to share any thoughts?
Sure. So my brother, like I said, we're about 15 years apart. And so I was really young when he was using this. But I do remember, his car being full of air duster cans and his friends sitting in his room and doing it. And there was a couple of times that we found him unresponsive, that, he was driving his friends to the hospital for being unresponsive, having seizures, and he was in a coma for like 11 days, I think, one time from it, just because it had cut off the oxygen to his brain. And I had mentioned the gateway drug thing in my initial post, just because I didn't know of him using any other drugs, at that age. And it was like later in his high school years. But this became really popular with him and his friends. And I feel like lots of them did turn out to become addicts. I know a few of them, it took their lives pretty young too. So,
Yeah. Yeah, this does cause hypoxia, where literally the DFE replaces the air in your lungs. So there's no oxygen in your lungs. People's voice goes down, like the opposite of helium, because the gas is heavy. So it'll settle into your lungs and replace the oxygen. And that is a potential risk. And then also people do things like inhale, like the bagging can cause asphyxia. So anoxic brain injury is an issue. So thank you for sharing that. And I think there should be zero tolerance for adolescents having access to this. And I think even if it stays on the market, it has to be totally clear to people. Do not just leave this in your cabinet next to your Lysol. This needs to be stored securely if there are adolescents in the home. No minor should be able to buy this stuff. That's crazy that someone underage can buy this stuff. So, I think that letting people have exposure to it is.
I like the question about the warning labels on the can, and then even to piggyback with that, what Dr. Pate said about talking to the first responders, or if Target keeps it behind the counter, is this something? We have a Walmart, not a Target in Little Falls. Is this something you can try to convince your local providers, or suppliers, I should say, to make that change? Or
Yeah, a lot of, without getting too much into the details, we'll see what happens as a result of this litigation, which may take a few years. But if it goes in favor, it's basically in favor of the families affected by DFE. Every place could be doing what Target does, which is the DFE is behind the counter. You need to show an ID to get it. And even then, there's a little bit of a risk there. But I love the idea of just little educational, little quick educational things for first responders. Keep your eyes peeled for those dusting spray cans, because they could be the cause of the accident, and they're hard to catch if you don't see it. They're hard to catch. I love that. Warning labels are a huge deal. It's very challenging to know how to write a warning label correctly, but there is such a thing as a correct warning label. And it's debatable whether you can look for yourself at the warning label on these cans and decide for yourself whether they're adequate. And then how do you dispose? I read the disposal instructions, but you're right. It's disposed of like a recyclable, I think, not like something that could be taken out of the garbage by a person and inhaled. It's not disposed as like an addictive drug. It's disposed as like, how do you dispose of a can of a propellant, So yeah, disposal is an issue. What else?
Charlie, don't you think, Charlie, that they're selling these big jumbo packs knowing clearly people are misusing them? They know, and they're just selling them because they know that if a big group of people for a party, they're going to want a big bunch of them.
Yeah, and it's cheap. The buy in bulk discount is half off. That tells you something. the actual chemical itself is not that cheap, is not that expensive. I have no problem with your hospital buying in bulk or auto mechanic buying in bulk. Even they need to store it correctly because the employees might get into it. But I have no problem with an industry buying in bulk, but household bulk purchases is crazy. It is crazy to buy in bulk for a house, and to encourage that, and not just buy in bulk, but also the supersized cans. You don't need that. Like a 10-ounce can will last a household a long time unless they're doing some really weird detail work. So.
Yeah, and I mean, the question about the healthcare, I mean, diversion exists. I mean, not that it's your typical population to choose this, but I mean, it's getting up there. And yeah, that's what I'm saying, right? That's the buy in bulk. I wonder, and this was a question, what about patients who have chronic lung disease, whether it's a COPD patient or an asthmatic patient, and, you know, maybe older, but does that last longer than that, like effect last longer than minutes or whatever?
Interesting. Yeah, like low ventilation states, I bet it does last longer. But the populations using this are largely in their 30s and younger. So I think my theory is that if we don't remove this from the market, we're going to have more and more people are going to age up, you know, and so you're going to have just like more and more generations of American exposed to this as long as it's on the market. But I do think as we see the aging, the 30-year-olds who are still using this stuff, as they age and develop emphysema, whatever, I think you're right. I think it will prolong effect because exhalation is the means of excretion, which is weird. So that's a great thought.
You know, I recognize that people are kind of drifting away because we're over, but still there's more questions. You know, one question I have, Charlie, did you read anything about other things that kind of enhance how this works, or drugs that people tend to use with it?
Yeah, meth and alcohol are both commonly used with it. And so some of these car accidents actually have multiple drugs, but some of them are just DFE. But meth and alcohol, and, you know, I can't tell you why. It may be just they're polydrug users in a rural area. They use what's available, or they may be using the DFE and the alcohol to boost each other, or the DFE and the meth might work together in some specific way. So, yeah.
Yeah, I had that same thing written down when you mentioned the breathalyzer. I had that written down, and I wonder if there is some point, you know, whether it's this litigation or these other children who've died, or so then they can do that, you know, when they do the breathalyzer, law enforcement at the scene, because they're there, if it can just be part of even like the normal breathalyzer.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to start somewhere to start gathering better data at how widespread it is, because it's potentially, you know, millions of people. It's potentially fairly widespread, and it could grow. And so I really think the first step, like you said, is how do we get better data on the prevalence of this? Exactly sort of like, so we can target our interventions, and better tox would be super helpful. So a breathalyzer could be, could be really helpful, or there may be some clever people that can figure out a better way to find it in the urine or find it in some test that's more usable. But I do think it's hard to convince people it's a problem when we're not seeing it in our face. 3 million Americans, 1% of people might be the number of people who are addicted to cocaine. We sure see cocaine, like we see it all the time, and 0.2% is the rate of people addicted to benzos. And boy, do we stay up at night worrying about the benzo addicted individuals. But I haven't lost a wink of sleep over dusting spray.
Yeah.
So.
I have one last question, Charlie. So how about what job you have? Can that predict whether you're going to have trouble with this? What if you're an IT guy and you're like constantly spraying this stuff? I mean,
you're in an isolated environment, working from home.
Yeah, hit here, hit there,
I don't think we're there yet, other than gaming culture does seem, because the gaming culture with they use a lot of, it's like literally marketed in computer stores to like in the gaming aisle. So I think gaming culture is a thing, but I don't know. I worry about the mechanics, the house, the the housekeeping, because the housekeeping are here at night, alone with the DFE sprays, and there aren't that many. So, and there are known to be high risk employment for other types of inhalants. The people who use those other inhalants, the house painters, huff paint. I mean, that makes sense. So I do think the mechanics, housekeeping, I do think they're probably at risk, but I don't know that yet.
Yeah, I don't know. An interlock before you put, kind of like they do for alcohol patients who are to throw an interlock on their car before they can start it every time.
Yeah.
That is such a good idea. I love it. I think it's a great idea. I think there's other ways, like the way that one video, the woman was just taking the longest inhale. It was like, you don't need 15 seconds of dusting spray to clean your keyboard. You can do it in 3 seconds. And so why are we letting these cans expel a jet of DFE for 20 seconds straight? And then I think we can make it a little harder to abuse the drug. Chris, if you have any connections, I'd love connections on that pediatric grand rounds thing. Otherwise, I'll ask some people about it.
We can probably find connections on that just based on the pediatric individuals who did talks on our COVID echo.
Yeah.
Cool. Let me know. I'm happy to spread the word. I believe this is either an epidemic already, or there's a lot of people out there that if they learned about, I can buy $5, I can buy a can of laughing gas, they'd be on it today, and I just worry about that. I worry it's like kind of a ticking time bomb.
Wow. Well, Charlie, that was an amazing talk. I think we all learned something here, because I'm certainly behind on this one. So.
Yep. Me too. Yeah.
Podcast on this one soon. We got to figure it out. We can do it from not the same room, although that's way more fun. But
yeah. Awesome. Talk to you later.
All right.
see ya.
Yep,
All
bye-bye.
right. Thanks everybody for coming next week.
And
Sam Quinones.